Hello everyone and welcome to Pros Before Joes. We will be going over the final perk for killing floor, the Berzerker perk, which is also my favorite perk as well. As always, we will be going over the stats, weapons, and general tactics to use when playing as this perk. Before we get started, I just want to quickly go over some of the terminology I might use for the newer players that might not have heard this before. The three terms you might not know are what's called flinch locking, stun locking, and kiting. Now flinch locking, when you say you're flinch locking a specimen, that means you're doing enough to damage it to prevent him from attacking you, but not enough to stun him. For stun lock, that basically means that you did enough damage to stun him so that he plays out his stun animation. Usually you see this with Skrakes when they're either bending over or looking side to side, or like with Husks when they're bending over. That's what's called the stun animation, where they're not able to do anything for a certain amount of time. And then the final thing, kiting, this is what you do when you're trying to go in and out of an attack zone of, say, like a flesh pound for instance, and avoiding getting hit while jumping in and attacking them and jumping out. That's effectively what kiting is. And these are just some advanced tactics that you can use later, and I will actually go into more detail when I go into the specimen elimination video for this stuff as well, but I'm just giving you a quick overview of what I mean when I say those terms. Let's go over the stats of the Berzerker. For all levels, you will get a bonus to damage and movement speed while wielding a melee weapon, except for the chainsaw. You will get a damage resistance to bloat bile. You will get a discount for all Berzerker weapons. You have the ability to not get grabbed by clots, which is fairly useful. Starting at level 1, you will get a bonus to your melee attack speed. You will get damage resistance to all damage, and you will start having Z time extensions, which increase once you start leveling up some more. Starting at level 5, you will spawn with a Machete. At level 6, you will spawn with a Fire Axe and combat armor, unless it's on Suicidal or Hell on Earth difficulties, and you just spawn with the Fire Axe. The first weapon we are going to cover is the knife. Now every player will spawn with a knife, but it does benefit from the Berzerker perk. While it is the weakest weapon in the game, the alt fire is capable of decapitating clots, gorefests, and stalkers on any difficulty. However, the knife is really only useful on the first and maybe the second wave if you have to, but you should be looking to buy a better weapon as soon as possible, because the knife is next to useless against late game specimens because of its weak damage and short range. The next weapon is the Machete. A quick sum up for this weapon is it's a higher damaging version of the knife with a slightly slower primary attack speed. As a result, it does a decent job at taking down first or second wave specimens, but like the knife, it suffers from the same weaknesses, that being weak damage and short range, and it can also be found at weapon spawns as well. The next weapon is the Fire Axe, or just the Axe for short. It is a slow but powerful melee weapon. This should be your primary weapon until you are able to forward the Katana or another primary weapon that you might want to use. After that, this is also useful as a secondary weapon for kiting flesh pounds or stun locking Skrakes because of its high damage and 1.25 headshot multiplier. The downside is it has a slow attack rate and is weaker than the Claymore, Scythe, and Dwarfs axe. However, it does weigh 1 block less than them, so it allows the player to go with a Katana, axe, and Lar loadout if that's your preference. The axe can sometimes be found at weapon spawns as well. The next weapon is the Claymore. The Claymore operates much in the same way as the Fire Axe and can be quickly summed up as an upgrade to it. It can be useful as a primary or secondary weapon depending on your preference. It has a faster swing speed and does more damage compared to the axe. It also has the longest reach out of any melee weapon available, and as a result is one of the most effective melee weapons for dealing with those annoying crawlers. The downside is it's tied for the most expensive melee weapon in the game with the Dwarves axe, and it weighs 1 more block than the Fire Axe, but like the axe, it is great for kiting flesh pounds or stun locking Skrakes. The next weapon is the Scythe. The Scythe operates in the same capacity as the Claymore, and it can be useful either as a primary or secondary weapon depending on preference. The Scythe is more of a side grade to the Claymore instead of an upgrade, as it has an increased damage and wider arc of attack at the expense of attack speed. It is also slightly less expensive than the Claymore as well. The Scythe is the slowest melee weapon in the game, but it does the most single shot damage out of all the melee weapons, especially when you take into account the 1.25 headshot multiplier. It can be used to stun lock Skrakes and kite flesh pounds. However, it is important to note that an alt fire headshot will exceed the damage threshold for causing the flesh pound to rage, so when kiting, make sure you're either using primary fire or you don't land headshots with the alt fire attack. The next weapon is the Dwarves Axe. The Dwarves Axe operates much like the Fire Axe in terms of range, and is comparable to the Claymore in terms of damage, speed, and cost. The unique thing for this weapon is the primary attack that will knock enemies away from you. With careful timing, this will prevent enemies from damaging you, and it's even possible to keep enraged flesh pound from damaging you by continually knocking them back before they are able to attack you. The next weapon, which is kind of required for a zombie apocalypse game, is the chainsaw. The chainsaw is recommended for use as a primary melee weapon. The primary attack has the fastest rate of fire of any melee weapon in the game, and it is useful for dealing with crawlers as they have a tendency to jump into your chainsaw blade, or it's also useful for quickly dispatching hordes of lesser specimens. The alternate fire is a heavy damaging vertical swing that is useful for taking out larger specimens quickly, and will actually stun a Skrake if you attack from behind. The downside of this weapon is it's the heaviest melee weapon in the game, and you don't get the melee speed boost, so as a result you will move slower. The chainsaw does not have a headshot multiplier, so damage output is also reduced. Just an interesting fact, in the source code of the game, it has an unused message that indicates the chainsaw may have originally been planned to have a finite amount of fuel, similar to what it is in Left 4 Dead 2, but that was never actually implemented. The next weapon is actually the one and only ranged weapon in the game that benefits from the Berzerker perk, and that is the Buzzsaw Bow. The Buzzsaw Bow's blades are actually considered melee weapons, so all damage bonuses apply for the perk. The bow will operate much in the same way as the crossbow for the sharpshooter perk. Like the crossbow, it has unlimited penetration, and the thing unique to the Buzzsaw Bow is that the blades will actually ricochet up to 5 times off of surfaces and continue to damage anything in its path. The blades are very powerful and will stun Skrakes on any difficulty with a headshot, and will stun them with body shots on any difficulty for Berserkers rank 3 or higher. This is also the only weapon in the game with projectile drop, as the blades will start to drop after a certain distance. The downside of this weapon is it's very heavy, as well as being the most expensive weapon in the Berserker's arsenal. It also has a low ammo pool, and while it is possible to recover the blades, the unpredictability of their trajectories means that at best you might be able to collect a quarter of them during a wave. The final and most commonly used weapon for Berserkers is the Katana. The Katana should be used as a primary weapon, and it has a fast swing rate and good damage, which is very effective for taking out all lesser to mid specimens on any difficulty, and it is moderately effective for dealing with flesh pounds and Skrakes. On hard or lower, the Katana is able to flinch lock a Skrake with primary fire and headshots. Body shots will flinch lock a Skrake for Berserkers level 3 and higher. The downside is that the Katana becomes less effective at taking out larger specimens at higher difficulties because of its low damage per hit, so it's recommended to carry a secondary melee weapon such as the axe to deal with Skrakes and flesh pounds. My preferred loadout is the Katana as my primary weapon, the axe as my secondary weapon, and the lever action rifle for dealing with crawlers or any sort of ranged needs that I might have. The Berzerker perk takes a lot of practice to get really good at, but in the hands of a skilled player, it's one of the most effective perks you can use. The biggest problem with newbies is that they have a tendency to rush into a group of specimens and then get murdered brutally as a result. The most important thing to know as a Berserker is to know where the specimens are and prioritize accordingly. Do not just rush in and try to hack up everything you see, because that will get you killed. The best thing to learn is how to properly use your footwork to avoid taking hits. What you need to learn is how specimens try to attack you, such as range, animation, and type of attack, to properly avoid taking damage. There's really no effective way to teach someone this. This is something that you will need to learn by doing, so don't get frustrated with it, because you will get better at recognizing their attack patterns. What I can do is give you advice on how to prioritize your targets. If you are able to get attacks in on sirens or husks, these should be your primary targets, because their ranged attack can be difficult to avoid or break through in order to get to them. So if you get the chance to kill them, take it. Once you get good at taking out Skrakes and Flesh Pounds with minimal damage to yourself through either stun locking and kiting, these should be your next targets if you can handle them. After that, anything else is fair game. Just make sure you know where crawlers are, just because they're the most annoying to deal with as a Berserker. Remember to attack from behind whenever possible, because you get double the melee damage with attacks from behind. On all difficulties, it's recommended you carry a ranged weapon alongside your melee weapons, such as a LAR or a pistol, in order to help deal with crawlers or other enemies you may need a ranged weapon for. On suicidal or Hell on Earth difficulties, it's recommended that you also go with a secondary higher damaging melee weapon along with your primary weapon to better effectively deal with Skrakes and Flesh Pounds. If you're playing with a Berserker on your team, make sure you do not get in the way of them, since they need to constantly move to avoid taking damage, and it does them no good to accidentally run into you. Also, if you see a Berserker taking on a Skrake or Flesh Pound, for the love of God, do not shoot at the specimen unless you want to enrage it and kill your Berserker. It's better to help shoot the specimens around them, so the Berserker can then focus on the big guy. Also, as a courtesy, try not to shoot specimens that the Berserker is going after. It's really annoying to run at an enemy only to just have it get shot by your teammate just as you were about to get to it. That'll wrap up this video then. I hope that you found the hints and tips useful. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time on Pros Before Joes.